You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is now a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle or me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is David Benner. David's been involved in journalism for most of his career, but he took a bit of a break a few years ago, more than 25 years ago, and has served as Director of Media Relations for the Indiana Pacers, in which role he serves as primary contact between the media and the team. David, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Can I get some Girl Scout cookies?
You certainly can get some Girl Scout cookies. You want to just email me your order?
Oh, no problem. I'll be happy to, because I missed out this year. My main contact, her daughter got too old for cookies.
Well, so, Mr. Jim Morris's wife and Mr. Morris, of course, Jackie, they're very involved in the Girl Scouts. So you have the connection much higher up on the food chain than I am.
No, you're going to be my connection. Congratulations.
Well, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. We've had your brother Bill on a few times in various roles, and I've been trying to get you on for a long time because of your career. You've done so many cool things. You've witnessed so many amazing things, and we're grateful for your time.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
You are Hoosier born and bred.
Correct.
How much you went to Center Grove High School, I believe. Is that correct?
Yep.
And where did you go to college?
Indiana.
And you graduated from IU in?
The 78, 79, something like that. I can't even remember anymore. I'm old. You got to remember that. I'm old. I forget things. Just ask my wife.
We're going to ask you about the incredibly sharp PR maven, as we know her, Ms. Jankowski, and how she's been helpful to you because she's one of the best in the business, incredibly respected. But what was it like? The reason I asked you about where you went to college and when you graduated was because you were there for the 76 undefeated team. IU went 32-0. What was it like being on campus for that experience?
Well, let's see. What can I say and what can't I say? It was a tremendous experience. There's no question about that. And to be part of as a student and a fan of seems like a once in a lifetime feat of going undefeated, winning the national championship and that type of thing. I did end up in the fountain that night at one point. And it was, I lived in Right Quad in the dorm, and we all sat around and like we had 3 different rooms. The 3rd floor of Right Quad, and watched the game. And then when we won, of course, everybody adjourned to the streets and started celebrating. It was a great moment. And I, like my brother, I look forward to the day that IU football can accomplish the same thing, and I may go back to Bloomington and jump in the fountain again.
Well, they've got the coach for it, that's for sure. Finally, after years of searching, we've had Fred Glass on. He's talked a little bit about IU athletics. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you about, a few questions actually. Were you there when they were filming Breaking Away?
Yeah. What year did they film that? Once again, you got to hit my memory button.
77, 78, I think is when the movie came out.
Yeah. And actually, our dorm in Wright Quad, Nichols House, had a really good bicycle team, and did a great job in the little 500. I think they finished in the top 10, which is pretty good. And the popularity of the race back then, because I haven't been in such a long time, was like huge because they filled the old 10th Street Stadium. And then, they filmed Breaking Away, and to go watch that movie and to have been in the stands and be part of the little 500 and that type of thing, that movie hit so home. And to this day, if it pops up on a channel, I'll try to watch at least a little bit of it.
Was it an accurate representation of the life you remember at IU?
Yeah. There wasn't a renegade team like the Cutters, which I think later came into vogue. But at the same time, it was like there were underdog teams there. Our team was an underdog because the fraternities always had the best bike teams, and it was always a uphill battle for dorm teams. There was another dorm team in Wright Quad, Dodd's House. They had a very good bicycle team as well. So aside from, it's like how accurate was Hoosiers? Well, Hoosiers was, fairly accurate and caught all the meaningful points. Same thing with Breaking Away. It's like any movie that tries to copy reality. There's going to be some things that are missing. And there's going to be some things that you go, okay, they took cinema liberty. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't matter because anybody who's ever been to the little 500 or went to IU and is part of it, it's basically, there's parts of it you go, yeah, I remember something like that. I remember this. I remember that. So I would give it probably a B+ on the accuracy scale.
Did you decide to go to IU partly based on what Bill had to say, like, it's a beautiful campus, you can have so much fun? And
no,
or was it something you just kind of decided on your own based on what you wanted to do for a living?
Journalism. And while I was there, I worked at the Daily Student, and I covered football with Lee Corso. I covered Indiana soccer with Jerry Yeagley, swimming and diving with Doc Councilman and Holy Billingsley, men's gymnastics, intramural sports. But you look back on things in your life and you realize that I got to be around Doc Councilman and Jerry Yeagley and Hobie Billingsley. I mean, they're all legends in their respective sports. And now you look at Lee Corso, who was somewhat of a showman, and now today he's like the ultimate showman on ESPN on Saturdays on college football. And so you look back on those relationships and you go, that was a pretty good college gig for me.
I'm trying to picture or remember a photo. Did IU win the national championship in swimming, in soccer, and in basketball, men's basketball, all the same year? I thought there's a picture with Yeagley and Councilman and Knight with their trophies.
Doc didn't win it when I covered them. Yeagley won his first when I covered the soccer. So, I got to cover the IU soccer team when they played in the national championship game in Philadelphia at Franklin Field, of all places. In a snow, not a snowstorm, but snowing. Mm-hmm. A fairly open air press box. They tried to keep it closed, but they couldn't keep the cold out. So I'm sitting there trying to, monitor the game and write about the game, and my fingers were just freezing. And that prepared me for later when I covered Notre Dame. And they had the old press box then, and you went up there, and if it was a cold day, you basically worked with your coat on.
Is that a story you retold when media members complain about what's going on at the field house, and you say, well, let me tell you one story?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because whenever a media member complains about their seating or almost anything, I have two replies. One, I covered high school basketball for the Star for a little bit. I would go and cover the sectional or the city tournament or the county tournament. You know how they have those pull-out portable bleachers?
Yes, sir.
Well, the students would stomp their feet on the bleachers, and the press table was like in the middle, and you're trying to, and I was, back then, I was very meticulous in keeping track of the game, the type of shot, the time that the shot occurred, these types of stuff. I was trying to do the right thing and try to do that with those, bleachers bouncing underneath you, and it was kind of crazy. And then I also covered a high school football game at Monrovia. And, I don't know how much time we got, but I'll try to make this as brief as possible. I wrote my story on a little portable typewriter where we had computers and even fax machines, I think. So I go into, and I ended up parking in this field adjacent to the main football field. So I write my story, dictate it back to the office, and I'm going to drive back to the office and then go over the story and resubmit it for the city edition. So I get done writing the story, I go out across the field, get to the gate that I came in. Well, the gate's locked. And I see there's one vehicle in the parking area, and it's mine. I'm trying to figure out, how do I do this? So I end up climbing a fence, having my little portable typewriter in a case, tossing it over the fence, breaking it. And I walk to my car, and I start driving back downtown. And all of a sudden, and it was a cold night, I got the heat on, this really god-awful smell starts creeping into the car. And I realized that when I got back to the office and looked at my shoes, I'd stepped in cow dung. And so those are the two things that I tell media people. I said, you got a gripe? Well, let me tell you a couple things. My other thing I always tell them, I said, you have a really good job, whether you realize it at this point or not. And you should be blessed that you got like a seat. And back then, the seat was usually pretty good, whether it was basketball or football or whatever. And just be happy to be here, And that's kind of the way I approached most of the events that I ever covered as a sports writer.
You mentioned I had this question written down, but I'll ask it now since we mentioned both Breaking Away and Hoosiers. Do you have a favorite sports movie?
Ooh, it would probably be Hoosiers is right up there. He's Got Game. Had Ray Allen in it. It's a good sports movie. I think Bull Durham's a good movie. I can't forget, what was the one about with the women's baseball team?
A League of Their Own.
League of Their Own. Yeah, those were all good, entertaining sports movies.
Do you consider Caddyshack a sports movie?
No.
But if it was,
but it would rank right. It would rank right up there. Because when that first came out, I laughed so hard, and that's another one. If it pops up on the channel, I'll watch it for a little bit because I just enjoy it so much.
You are actually, if I have my chronology correct, speaking of terrific movies that came out during your time in college, the greatest college movie of all time,
Animal House.
What did you think of that movie? What did your friends think of it? As you had the college experience.
We all loved it because we all lived it in some form or another. I, I still get together with my college friends every year for a golf weekend. We've been doing it for like 37 years now, something like that. And, we talk about college days and how rambunctious of us were. We tell the same lies, but we all refer to the, as they say, keggers that we had. So, yeah, there's anybody that watches Animal House that went to college and had some sort of college life, they can all relate at some point in that movie.
You get to work with, and I'm assuming you've known him for a long time to remain in your college years. And we're talking to David Benner, who's director of media relations for the Indiana Pacers. You must swap stories from time to time with Mr. Quinn Buckner, captain of the 76 IU undefeated national championship team, who frequently does color commentary on Pacers games.
We don't talk about that much. I do relate the story when I got to go to the Purdue IU game up at Purdue. And I think is that the game that Scott May broke his arm? It was the year before.
That's in 75. Mm-hmm.
The year before they won a championship. And they were on their way to an undefeated season and possibly a national championship. So I tell him, I said, every once in a while I'll mention to him, I said, you realize, Glenn, I said, I almost got mugged because of you. Because I'm in Mackey Arena, and I'm an IU fan. And he made like a basket of some sort. And I stood up and, put both my arms in the air and shouted out, "Out of the way, Quinn." And the next thing I know, I have these people around me telling me that I should sit down and shut up. And I'm not a fighter, so I decided I would sit down and shut up.
You just let the scoreboard do the talking for you?
The scoreboard do the talking.
On the list of, when you talk about particularly Coach Knight's accomplishments, and I may ask a question about him, same question I asked Robin Miller when he was on along with your brother. Maybe get the same answer, maybe not. On the list of Knight's accomplishments, I think the most underrated accomplishment, one that does not get enough credit, is the fact that he went 36-0. He and his team did in the Big Ten. They went 18-0 and then 18-0 consecutive years. That's unfathomable to do. I mean, 1 year is okay. That's a remarkable achievement. It hasn't happened since, but to do it 2 years in a row. What do you think of Coach Knight and his legacy?
There's probably two answers to that. Answer number one is what he accomplished, how he accomplished it during his heyday years is a testament to not only him, but the players that he had. And that was back in the day when recruiting was not as cutthroat as it has been in recent years and this day. And he could basically go out and get guys because of who he was and the record that they had. You didn't have one and dones back then. You just had a lot of, I want to say, freedom to pick and choose your players. Mm-hmm. It's a competition rather than freedom. So having said that, yeah, what he accomplished, and under any era, what he did accomplish was remarkable. As, I got on in later life and different stories, including my last year at the Star. Before I went to the Pacers, I covered Notre Dame football in the fall and Indiana basketball in the winter. So I dealt with Lou Holtz, who was like one of the most accessible guys you ever wanted to come across, and a great coach. And then I covered Bob Knight. And that year that I covered him was Damon Bailey's senior year. And they had a very good team. That was the last Sweet 16.
That's right.
that.
They beat Kentucky that year too at the Dome.
Well, that's another story. So, and they had a chance to maybe win another championship, but Sharon Wilkerson broke his arm. And I think it was one of the regional games. And that was the same year that Knight kicked his son in the Notre Dame game, headbutted Sharon Wilkerson at the Michigan State game. They got beat by 50 at Minnesota. Mm-hmm. It was just a very crazy year. And I tell people this day, every time I got in the car to go to Bloomington or to go to the airport, all I could think of is, what's it going to be now? What's going to be the next thing that hit? And he didn't talk to the media until February.
At all?
He talked to them after they beat Kentucky. But he didn't talk to the media until February. So,
you said you had a story about that game, the IU-Kentucky game?
Well, just the fact that it's part of a list, real quickly. In 4 weeks in succession, I covered the so-called game of the century, Notre Dame and Florida State. Florida State was number one. Notre Dame beat them at Notre Dame. Then the next week, Boston College came in to play Notre Dame. Got beat on a last-second field goal, in which that last drive, a Notre Dame linebacker who shall remain nameless had an interception in his gut and dropped it.
I won't say his name either.
Why I can remember that, I don't know. But the third week was the IU-Kentucky game at the Dome. And obviously, in Kentucky, here's the thing. Florida State was number one. Then Notre Dame became number one. Boston College beat them. Indiana played Kentucky. Kentucky, I believe, was number one.
I think that's right.
Indiana beat them. So the fourth week of that, Indiana comes to Butler. And Butler upsets Indiana. I don't know what Indiana was ranked, but it doesn't matter. But to see 4 games like that in succession was just like, the sports writer's dream.
And am I correct in remembering that the team that beat IU in the first game of the regionals after the Sweet 16, didn't they lose to Boston College in that tournament?
Bill Curley was the center.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
Lou Holtz and Knight and Gene Cady, of course, who's been a guest on the podcast. He was a terrific guest after I shook his hand at the Cityway YMCA and asked him to come on the program. And I said, may I shake your hand, sir, even though I'm still mad at you for beating IU. And he cursed at me and said, I'm still mad at you for beating us. I didn't do anything, but what an incredible man. But you covered sports, and we'll get back to how your career started, but staying on this messaging arc, you covered sports where there was Larry Brown, where there were some real dinosaurs. And I say that as a compliment. Those old time coaches who grew up and came to maturity in the 50s and 60s and 70s. How were they kind of as a collective group? Easy to deal with, hard to deal with, short-tempered?
Lou was great to deal with. He would come in on Tuesdays, and Notre Dame would bring in a player, and you got to interview the player. And then Lou would get up on the podium and basically answer questions for 45 minutes every Tuesday. And he was entertaining. Matter of fact, then you go to Knight, and like I said, access was very, very difficult. I kept trying for Greg Elkin. Week after, is there any chance I could sit down and talk to Coach Knight? And I talked to Coach Knight. And he eventually gave way, in February. Larry Brown. Larry Brown was great. I mean, to this day, I love that guy. He was different, and he was the guy. And let me tell you something: all three are great coaches. And but Larry would, if a player had a good game, Larry fell in love with him. If a player had a bad game, Larry wanted to trade him the next day. And, Donnie Walsh tells the story all the time about how Larry would come in every day in the office. We got to trade this guy. We got to trade this guy. And Larry and Donnie would say, okay, Larry, I'll see what I can do. And then once Larry left, Donnie just brushed it off and would forget about it because Larry would move on to the next guy the next day. Bad practice. Larry wanted to trade him. So a couple things along those lines. Night, I got to watch a practice once, and I got to watch the Holtz practice. The amazing thing about those two guys is something would happen, and they would stop play, and they would go back to like 3 possessions later and recall where every guy was and who made mistakes. The fact that they could like zone in on what was happening in the moment, and then 10 minutes had passed, they would go back and recite everything that would happen, just blew you away. Moving on to Larry, my favorite Larry's, well, I got 2 favorite Larry stories. We played the Clippers out in LA. We won the game. And back then, Larry wanted to talk to the team before we'd take guys out for post-game interviews. So I'm standing outside the locker room, and this guy comes up, and he's got a baseball cap on, and he walks right past the security people and starts going in the locker room. I said, hey, excuse me for a minute. You can't go in yet. Larry's still talking to the team.
And you were working for the Pacers at the time?
The Pacers at the time. And he said, well, I'm a good friend of Larry's. And I go, and you are? And he goes, Billy Crystal. I went, oh, hang on a minute, Mr. Crystal.
Who's a huge Knicks fan, as I recall, is he not?
Huge Clippers fan.
Billy Crystal's a huge Clippers fan?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Isn't he New York born and bred? Like
he is, but he's out in LA making movies and stuff. And, to be honest, the guy's really short. I didn't know who he was. I've seen his movies, and he's got a ball cap on. How do I know?
So he's trying to be inconspicuous, but he expects you to recognize him.
He's trying to be, I'm sure out there everybody knows who he is, but I'm just some rube from Indiana who watches his movies, and he looks bigger on screen than he does in person. So it's an easy mistake to make. I apologize. But my second Larry story was his last year with the team. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion that he's done. He's not going to coach anymore, blah, blah, blah. So he calls me up on Saturday before our last game on Sunday afternoon. He says, hey, I'm going to hang it up tomorrow. You might want to get a press release together. I said, okay. I said, have you discussed this with Donnie? He goes, I haven't talked to Donnie about this. And I went, what? He goes, I will. I said, okay. So I prepare a press release. Donnie's out in Arizona covering the pre-draft camp back then. I go to the airport to meet Donnie when he gets off the plane. I've got the press release in his hand. I said, hey, just so you're aware, Larry's going to resign tomorrow. Here's the press release. And Donnie goes, oh, God, Donnie, typical Donnie. Oh, yeah, well, that's Larry. Donnie says to me, he'll change his mind by tomorrow. I go, well, I just want to let you know we're going to be prepared, blah, blah, blah. So we get to the press conference, post-game press conference. And of course, the first question says, Larry, there's a lot of speculation that you're going to, resign. What can you comment on that? And Larry goes, I don't know where that came from. I've only discussed it with 3 people, Donnie Walsh, my wife, and David Benner. And I'm like going, don't throw me under the bus.
Well, because they always assume the PR person is the leaker, and we're never the leaker.
Yeah. And I was like, and by the way, he had told 2 writers, one of them, my brother, prior that he was going to resign. So I'm sitting there going, well, it isn't just Donnie and your wife and me. It's been others. And God knows who else he told. But that was Larry. And he did not resign that day. He waited a couple of days before he did. So
you are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmond Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is David Benner, former Indianapolis Star journalist, and has been, for the past 25 years, Director of Media Relations for the Indiana Pacers. David, is there a particular Hoosier leader or legend you admire most?
That's a good question. Probably, Donnie Walsh was ranked right up there. Larry Bird was ranked right up there. And I'd say, because I spent so many years around Donnie, and he was instrumental in my hiring, so I'd say he's probably number one. Larry's right up there. Those two I'd say stand out because they're both very unique individuals, and I'll leave it at that. They're both very unique individuals who did a great job when they were in the positions they were in when I was around.
Through the intercession of his wonderful, wonderful daughter, Shannon, Donnie Walsh came on the podcast. He was such a terrific guest. It was such an honor to talk to him. Very engaging. Still very New York, though. My family, part of my family is from New Jersey, so you kind of recognize it when you hear it. But he was very forthcoming. Is that kind of how he was as a boss? Very engaging, easy to work with in a pretty high pressure environment.
Yeah, and I still tease him to this day that the only time he ever lied was around draft time, because he never wanted to tip his hand about which direction he's going, which is why he got Chuck Person, which is why he got Reggie Miller. And he's as good a man as you'll ever want to encounter. I mean, just a great person, and did a lot for this community that people don't know. And look at the Pacers' track record when Donnie was in charge. He took a team that was going nowhere and ended up, I wish I had the sheet in front of me, but, we've made the playoffs like 20 out of 25 years or something like that. And he was there for it. He was the guy that got us to the NBA Finals, and then reconstructed the team to be really, really good in mid 2000 season or 2000 era, to where we go to the conference finals. We had a team capable of winning a championship on many occasions. So, and then you go off the court with Donnie, and you could talk to him about anything. And when I was a writer, I once wrote something that he didn't agree with, and he sends me a letter, and then the letter, all it is "Your world!" ! With a button of outer space. Donnie Walsh.
Let's talk. We kind of pushed forward a little bit on various topics and kind of went to IU because I know how important that school is to you and your brother, obviously, and Jane Jankowski, obviously. So many people in Indiana just love Bloomington, love IU. But you very quickly started working, if that's the right term. I think it is, because you worked hard, probably didn't get paid or get paid very much, at the Indianapolis Star. Was that your... Go ahead.
Did it for love.
Did it for love. You and Jeff Smulyan and another podcast guest, by the way, and Bill Benner. Was that your goal? You wanted to write for the Star?
Yes. Because, I started there as a copy boy when I was 17. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Well, I still haven't grown up, but I sat around and dabbled at writing. I took 2 years of typing in high school. Little at the time did I realize how much that would influence my life, because all of a sudden I found a quick way to write and do things like that. So while working at the Star as a copy boy for could save money and go to school, I'd sit around, I'd write goofy little, satires, National Lampoon type things about people I knew in the sports department. And I also started on Friday nights covering high school football and basketball for the then Daily Journal. Now it's the Johnson County Daily Journal. And so that's how I kind of got a feel for it. And then a couple people encouraged me and said, "Hey, you've got a knack for this. You ought to look at it and pursue it." And so that led to me going to IU because the journalism school, and, the Daily Student was a very highly regarded college newspaper. So it made it kind of a natural transition. And while there, I built up, I wouldn't say a resume, but I built up a clip file of covering all the different sports that I covered. And, the Star, thankfully, John Banch, God bless him, hired me. And I was a desk person. And they would throw me an occasional going, go cover a high school game, go do this, go do that. And it became in my blood. And the thing I liked about it was different every day. Whether you were on the desk in the office working with Bill or Robin or whoever, or going out to cover something, it was different every day. And then, I tell people, I've said this many times, I haven't, except in high school when I baled hay and weighed sod, I've never had a real job.
You came to the Star in 78, and one of the big events, huge event, probably second, I would say, obviously, the Indianapolis 500 was the biggest event, and that was wrapped up by Robin Miller, whose passing is very recent. I want to get your thoughts on him in a few minutes, but in 1978, the single class basketball tournament was such a gigantic happening, let alone an event. I know Mr. Bill Benner's thoughts on multi-class basketball. Would you like to weigh in on the difference between now and then?
Yeah, I understand Bill's passion, and the 72, 73, or no, 71, 72 Center Grove team, I was the student manager because I basically sucked as a basketball. I sucked as an athlete.
Those who can't do right.
Let's just don't isolate it on one sport. I was bad at them all. But our team went to the Final Eight in the state. And we upset Richmond, that was ranked, I think, number 5 in the state at the time, on a last-second shot in Nickel Fieldhouse. We were the smallest school left in the Sweet 16. So I catch the dynamic of the single-class basketball that Bill is so passionate about. But I also think, had we had class basketball back then, we might have been a state champion. I mean, our team was that good. So I see both sides. I also see, somebody, not my brother, strangely enough, somebody said, well, I'll just give them participation ribbons and stuff like that. Well, a really small school in the state that makes it to the Class A state finals or, the Senate State or whatever, what that does for the community, I think, is often overlooked. And I think it's very important because I was part of the small school experience of having success in the state tournament. And it was like amazing. It was great. It was, to come back from losing to Connorsville, which went on to win the state that year, to come back to the gym and see the gym packed with all those fans, you don't, a lot of schools and a lot of young athletes don't get to experience that. So I get it. Center Grove now is a football power. They have a really good boys and girls golf team. They have a great softball program, but they're in the upper class now. They're in the big school class. Well, I wouldn't want to see Center Grove football play a small school in football under this dynamic. Basketball, it's, I don't know if it's the same way or not, because you're only dealing with five players on 12-man roster, and you can have one guy that can carry it. But at the same time, I see both sides of the argument, and I think it's always going to be an interesting debate. Bills are never going to be happy, but in the meantime, you got to think of the small schools. You got to think of the communities and what it does for them.
It's interesting. Here we are in 2021, listening to you to refer to how small Center Grove was. And the last time I drove past it, it looks like a junior college. I mean, it's massive, to their credit. Do you have a single high school athlete you covered who was just so good? The memory is stuck with you all these years.
Scott Skiles.
Plymouth.
I mean, I covered the Fort Wayne Semi-State that he was in and watched him. Well, actually, there's two. George McGinnis. I loved watching George McGinnis. But, I was a kid then.
Right.
And as a teenager, almost a teenager, around teenage years, but watching, and I only saw George play on TV. But Scott Skiles, for a 6'1" guard, single-handedly, got them to the state championship. And it was amazing how he could take over a game for a 6'1" guard. And he, like I said, he kind of won the semi-state on his own. Then he won the first game in the finals, kind of on his own. I mean, they had a good team. They had good complementary pieces. And in the state championship, I can't remember the young man's name, kind of, supplemented Scott. But he was so entertaining as a high school player that I would put Scott Skiles live in person, George McGinnis on television, because George was, talk about a league of their own. George was in a league of his own.
And we're trying to get Mr. McGinnis on the podcast and to talk to him a little bit, do something about a little bit of a Slick Leonard retrospective and talk about the ABA days. We'd love to talk to him because he gets mentioned frequently as like, you don't understand how much bigger and stronger and better George McGinnis was than everybody else on the court until he got to the NBA. But before then.
Yeah, it's funny that you mention that, because somebody asked me who I thought was the best high school player ever in the state of Indiana. And you think of Oscar. I mean, there's been so many of them, but I've never seen anybody like George. Just for his size and his mobility and the way he dominated the game. I vote George. I vote Oscar. I vote George 1. I vote Oscar 1A. And all I've seen of Oscar, again, this is who you see. All I've seen of Oscar is like old film clips.
Sure. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you went to the Star, 1978. It was a few years after that the Hoosier Dome was built, and the Colts moved here from Baltimore. Talk to us a little bit on the Leaders and Legends podcast, your reaction to that news. Not necessarily the dome being built. That's obviously a cool subject, but you as a sports writer at the biggest paper in the state, and now you have an NFL franchise right down the street from Star headquarters.
My reaction is that opened the door for me to cover the Pacers, because Dave Overbeck was covering the Pacers, and they moved him and John Banch, over to cover the Colts, along with the columnists at the time, whether it be Bill or Robin or whoever. So my reaction, the one thing is you grow up there and you hear all the remarks about Indian No Place, and it hits you hard. And the Colts coming opened up a variety of doors for a lot of things that happened. The NCAA coming, opened up a lot of doors for a lot of things to happen. And, downtown became a vibrant place. Downtown on Sundays, which was like, what was going on Sundays before the Colts game? Nothing. Restaurants weren't open. So it helped solidify us as a big league city. And I always take offense, for a quick opinion here, I take offense to those who refer to this as a football town. No, it's not a football town. It's a sports town. Just look at the different events that are hosted between NCAA swimming and diving championships, the Pan Am games, the Pacers, the Colts. Even now with all the, you go downtown on the weekends, there's a major volleyball tournament here, or there's a major basketball tournament here. The proliferation of what's going on at Grand Park out in Westfield. It's a sports town, everybody. You could always say we've been a basketball state. Yeah, I think you can make that argument fairly easily. But we since have evolved in this particular area, we're a sports town. It's not a football town. It's not a basketball town. It's a sports town, which I think is great.
25 years ago, or let's say even before then, if I had said in 2012, Indianapolis would not only host a Super Bowl, but completely redefine for the NFL what it meant to host a Super Bowl, you would have said, if I just happened to make that statement in 1984.
It'll never happen. I mean, you face the reality of it. When we worked at the Star and we would go to lunch at 7:30, 8 o'clock after we put the first edition away, there was the St. Fritz restaurant downtown. There just wasn't much for you to go do. And, again, you look back at 1984 or whatever and say, oh, you're going to host a Super Bowl. I'm not going to host a Super Bowl. Super Bowl's in January or February. They ain't going to want to come here and freeze the nuts off. And, hey, we had the All-Star game here and we had freaking blizzard. The NBA All-Star game, we had that and we had a blizzard. So you looked at the logistics and about how everybody wants to go to a warm weather city in February. And no way.
Let me append to that before we move on. If, let's say 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I would have said there is a national health crisis, worldwide, but a national health crisis so terrible and ubiquitous that the city of Indianapolis is going to host the entire NCAA tournament. You would have said?
No way. And again, you look at that, and I've been to other cities, I've been to a lot of other cities that have hosted major sporting events and things like that. Who does it better? Who could pull that off? But again, back then, you're going, pandemic, they're going to host the NCAA tournament? No way. But guess what? They found a way. And they always do. You got a Super Bowl. You got a men's Final Four. You got a women's Final Four. We got swimming championships. We got Olympic trials. Yeah, we can do it.
If there was a sporting event, any sporting event in history you wish you could have covered, or whether it's a team or in a particular game, which would you choose?
Two parts to that. I would have liked to have gone to an Olympics. I'm jealous of Bill for that. And I will say the best thing that I ever covered was the Olympic swimming trials. That
were here?
Yeah.
Where they built a swimming pool in the field house?
That was for U.S. events. I think that was the U.S. Open
So this would be at the natatorium?
This event at the natatorium. And to see, and it happens in track and field, and I'm sure it happens in other sports, but to see dreams crushed or fulfilled by 1/1000th of a second made it so unique. You know, these young athletes compete and train for 4 years with the ultimate goal. Your ultimate exposure is the Olympics for a sport like that. And to see, like I said, to see hopes dashed or fulfilled, it's just like an amazing thing. You know, to see them, you know, touch the wall. And you see it in the Olympics. They touch the wall and they turn and immediately look to see where they ended up finishing. And it's either splashes of joy or tears, you know. And that, covering that, like, hit me more than anything I've ever covered.
If you could interview any sports figure in history, whom would you choose?
Muhammad Ali.
Did you ever meet him?
Yes. He was at one of our games and came to the locker room afterwards and met everybody. But that was when I believe what Parkinson's disease is what he had.
Mm-hmm.
It had taken hold, so he was still very engaging. But in his prime, I would have loved to have been Muhammad Ali. That would have, because he was so outspoken, so brash, and he talked the talk, but he backed it up. He walked the walk. You know, he was brazen, he was outspoken, and he was a damn good fighter. So yeah, Muhammad Ali would be number one.
Kind of hard for folks coming of age, you know, now or in maybe the past 10, 15 years to realize how gigantic boxing was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's just, I couldn't name any champion now, but back in 1970s, early 80s, middleweight, welterweight, you kind of knew them all, whether it's because of wide world of sports or just the fact that the sport itself was so popular. One question I wanted to make sure that I asked you, because he's my dream. He is probably my dream Leaders and Legends podcast guest, and that's Mr. Larry Bird. I'm holding out hope, very, very faint, but, you know, obviously it would be beyond a dream to be able to have a conversation with someone who's so remarkable at his craft. But what was it like to work with him and for him?
It was a joy. And, you know, the thing about Larry is there's no black and white. And there's no, well, I'm going to say that there is black and white. There's no gray with him. He, to engage with him on a daily basis for 3 years, three fairly successful years. It was fun. And then to deal with him later as a front office person making decisions, it was the same thing. And when I was a writer, I got to know him a little bit because every time we go to Boston, I'd have to do the obligatory Larry Bird story for the Star. And so that's kind of how I got to know him a little bit. But one of my favorite Larry stories was when he first got hired as coach. An AP writer from New York calls me and says, "Hey," he says, "can you ask Larry, I got one simple question. Does he think Michael Jordan is the best player ever?" I said, "Well, I don't know if they'll answer, but I'll go ask him." So I go to see Larry and I go, "Larry," explain to him what the thing is, Michael Jordan the best player ever. Larry's reply, "He's in the top two."
He didn't identify the other one?
He didn't have to. Exactly who he meant, too. But I talked about Knight and Holtz earlier. Larry had the same makeup of go in his office, before a game to talk to him about something or rather. And he'd have an old Celtics game on. And sit there and he goes, now watch this. It says, this happens, this happens. Now four plays down the road here. This will happen, this will happen. He has an amazing recollection for things that transpired in games that he played in. And I'll tell you what, they gave a lot of credit to Dick Harder and Rick Carlisle, Dick being the defensive guy and Rick being the offensive guy, which was justified. But Larry was a hell of a coach. And they go, well, he inherited a really talented team. Yeah, he inherited a really talented team that had egos and wanted playing time and all this other stuff. And Jalen Rose, who was like one of the problem children when he got there, Jalen to this day, idolizes Larry for what he did for Jalen as a player. And, and like I said, Larry had a simple thing. He said, hey, we're going to practice for an hour and 15 minutes. You guys want to go longer? Then don't practice hard. You want to keep it an hour and 15 minutes? Then practice hard. Very simple. He has.
Was he intimidating? Was he an intimidating figure? I mean, he's obviously very big. He's like 6'9", 6'10", had this amazing career. He's in everybody's top 10 list. Greatest NBA players of all time, spectacular high school and college career. I mean, that's a lot to deal with, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Or maybe I'm wrong. And how did you deal with it? Because he is Larry Legend.
Bottom line is he's Larry Bird. And right, one of the all-time greats to ever play the game. So he can be, he's intimidating to the players that played for him until they got to know him. And Larry is one of your more basic, true to the earth is the right explanation. Human beings will ever want to encounter. He's funny, he's witty, he's smart, he's intelligent. He's got the whole package. And I don't think that because I've been around him so long and been around him enough, both when he was a coach and as a front office guy. There's also a humbleness to him. There's a humbleness and there's a competitive spirit to him. You don't lose to him in anything. Cornhole, free throws, whatever. But at the same time, when he was in the front office, we go to play Boston in the playoffs, and I do a travel list, and on the travel list is everybody that travels. So they give me credentials for everybody. So I go to Larry, and I go, hey, you don't need this around here, but here's your credential. And he goes, and he proceeds to take the credential and put it on. I go, Larry, I just gave it to you just for the hell of it. You're Larry freaking Bird in Boston Garden. I don't think you need a credential. He said, well, you gave it to me, so I should wear it. So, there's that part of him too. But I still laugh at that, you walk through Boston Garden knowing like his numbers in the rafters, his pictures on the wall.
He's wearing his credentials. Could you name, let me ask it a different way, as within the few minutes we have left, will you name your Pacers starting five since you've been there?
Ooh. Wow. I have people ask me my favorite player and things like that. Well, Reggie Miller, Jermaine O'Neal, Dale. See, sometimes my personal interactions enter into this. Jermaine, Dale Davis is a power forward. So that's what, 3? I'm trying to come up with Point guard. I mean, those really good teams. Probably have to go with Mark Jackson as the point guard. If I'm going by position, in the small forward, I'd probably have to go with Paul George. I'm sure I'll leave somebody out, and I'll go back. I'll go back 2 hours from now and go, oh crap.
We've talked a little bit. We've mentioned someone I think it's fair to say we both love, and that's Bill Benner,
Yeah.
former columnist and journalist in the Indianapolis Star, who retires and keeps working. It's one of the things we love about him. What was it like when you went over to the Pacers and he's still at the Star?
Yeah, go ask him that question. I wouldn't tell him anything. Zero. And he'd go, oh, come on, I'm your brother. And I go, yeah, but are you going to pay me when I get fired? I don't think so. And by the way, speaking of Bill Benner and, throwing Bob Knight back into this, Bill taught me how to water ski. That was like playing under Bob Knight. There were a lot of bad words uttered in my direction because I did not pick up water skiing quite as quickly as Bill thought I should.
What about skiing?
No, he took me one time down to back then it was Nashville Alps.
Right, that's right.
Back in the day,
my sister worked there.
Oh, I'll tell you what, I tried to ski, and then I struggled with it, and I woke up the next day and I was sore as hell, and I told Bill, I'm done. I'm not doing this ever again. Now he's doing it at age, 89 or however old he is. And he's going to like the Blue Diamond Hill or slope or 20 miles an hour. And he wonders why his back hurts. Yeah, I have no idea, Bill.
Another name we mentioned a few minutes ago when we were talking about public relations and media is your wife, Jane Jankowski, who used to work for Indiana University, as I recall, but spent 8 years, I think the entire 8 years, as Governor Mitch Daniels' communications person, press secretary, and she currently works for Governor Eric Holcomb. She's incredibly well respected, does an amazing job. Everybody knows her, has a high opinion of her. Was it helpful to have her as someone to like bounce ideas off of? Or was it something you guys just really did? We don't discuss work at home.
No, it's good to be able to talk to someone who kind of understands what you go through. And I'll tell you what, my position is far easier than when she was with Mitch, and now she's like deputy chief of staff for Eric. And, her stuff is like real life. It's pandemic. It's, opening the automobile facility near Greensburg. It's things that affect people on a daily basis. Mine is a little bit different, but yeah, we discuss things probably more often than people would realize. And trust me, she offers her opinion. I don't always agree with it, but she offers her opinion. Stuff, like I said, I try to stay out of it because that's way over my head. The legislature is discussing the budget. I can barely figure out my own budget within the Pacers. So, but no, she's been a wonderful sounding board and put up with a lot of stuff over the years, with the travel that this job entails and my recent health issues.
How long have you been married?
In 20 years.
20 years. Last question I want to ask you about the Pacers, and then I do want to ask one question about your health, and then we will get to the 5 questions with which we end all podcasts.
Oh, boy.
Worst night in your career? The brawl?
Yeah, no question.
Netflix recently, I think it's Netflix released this documentary about it. Did you watch it? Did you need to? And without, I don't want to keep bringing up a bad subject per se, but Did you just walk off the court like, I can't believe what my next week of my life is going to be like?
I watched the documentary. I thought it was fair. I thought it gave a better version of our side of the story. I was not at the game. I skipped that trip. But when all hell broke loose, I immediately, got in communication with Jeff McCoy, who's my assistant, who's at the game, and said, "Whatever you do, don't let anybody in that locker room talk. We can't do that." And then I went to the airport and met the team and basically told them, I said, "When you exit, don't run over anybody, don't roll down your window, don't talk to anybody." Because this, was evident by what happened. It was going to become a legal matter. Mm-hmm. And you didn't need to have yourself quoted on television and, sent worldwide some ridiculous statement that you would utter. So just keep your mouth shut, keep your windows rolled up, and go home.
Were you watching the game on television?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And, the funny thing was, we went out to dinner with another couple, and I kept glancing at the TV to see how the game was going at halftime, because he had a good first half. The halftime interview on ESPN was on our chest. So I was thinking, well, this is good. We're going to be 9-2 and be our arch rival in the East. And then I get home, sitting there watching the game, thinking, this is even better. We're beating the crap out of them. And then all hell broke loose, and I yelled at Jane. I said, "Oh, bleep." She goes, "Oh, bleep, you're right." And so, yeah, it was a very, very interesting week from that standpoint, because, the media showed up at every practice and basically said nobody's going to talk about it. Because we really cannot talk about it. Now, that was the best or worst night, and real quickly, the best night as far as chaos was the Michael Jordan return game. My first year there. So, we had 24 hours notice to prepare for an NBA Finals game, basically.
So you knew, actually, I have that question written down because I wanted to ask you about Reggie hitting the shot, the deep three in the playoffs against the Bulls, where everyone goes crazy and Bird acts like he's in a coma, which is that video is so fun to watch because just the reaction to Bird's non-reaction when Miller hits that deep three. But I watched the Jordan return game. So you got 24 hours notice and you have to keep it quiet, or does everybody know?
We had 24 hours notice. We were practicing at Park 2 because there was a hockey game in Market Square Arena that night. And the game the next day was like at 12 noon. So the turnaround, like I said, from hockey on Saturday night to a nationally televised game that suddenly became credential-wise an NBA Finals game. And, about 14 hours left, getting the building ready was they had like 13 hours to do that. And I just remember telling guys that requested credentials, I said, "I'll get you a credential. I can't guarantee you a seat." And, the building crew did amazing job. And, I came home, slept 2 hours and went back to the arena. And I left at like 2 and got up at 4 and was down at the arena by 5. But it was great because we won the game.
I was just going to say we won the game. Last question I want to ask you, and you alluded to it just a few minutes ago. You have been fighting ferociously and courageously a significant health issue for a few years now. Please tell the Leaders and Legends podcast audience how you're feeling, how you're doing.
Right now, I'm doing okay. I got colon cancer in 2010. They removed part of my colon. Went pretty cancer-free for 7, 8 years. And then I think it was 18. I got sick again. I can't remember what the word is. Meticulated,
Metastasized.
yeah, there you go. I've been wondering what that damn word is.
Benefit of an IPS education.
Yeah, okay. So anyway, it did that to the fatty tissue of my stomach. So I've been off and on chemo for 3 years now. But it crops up at different times, and the oncologist says it's kind of be in your blood. It's going to be something you're going to have to face, and so I face it and I deal with it, and I'm taking chemo pills now. But the other thing is, not I don't want to sound too melodramatic, but our players on occasion, pre-pandemic, and I'm sure it'll resume once we get past that. But we go and visit Riley Children's Hospital, and you see those kids there, and you think to yourself, well, I've had a life, and I've had a good life. And then you take it, to when you go and you get infusions, or you go to the cancer center for whatever you have to go, and you see other people there that you just know that they're worse off than you, and you go, yeah, I can't complain. I won't. It's a card I've been dealt, and you deal with it, and you trust your doctors, and you thank every day for these wonderful people that work in these cancer centers and all the stuff they do.
You recently, Indianapolis and the motorsports world, and your brother, I know they were very close. You lost your friend, Robin Miller. Give us just 5 to 10 words describing Robin Miller.
Crass, profane, but a heart of gold, and a hell of a rider.
We've reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask all of our guests the same question. Are you ready?
Oh boy. Okay.
What was your first job?
Ooh, laying sod.
That's a first.
Hey, I laid sod and I baled hay. Neither one of them was fun. And I decided back then, this was in high school, I got to find something a little bit easier.
What was your first concert?
Bachman Turner Overdrive.
Not bad at all. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you recommend?
Ooh. Oh, wow. Well, I like humor. So Semi-Tough, Danny Jenkins.
But book's better than the movie, I'm guessing.
Oh, much better.
I remember Bob Kravitz and I are huge. I haven't talked to him in a while, but are huge North Dallas 40 fans. That movie,
yeah,
and Slapshot, I guess I should say. Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there in person as it happens, which event would you choose?
See, that becomes an easy one. Olympics.
You have a particular Olympic?
No, any Olympics I think would be great to witness, just because you get to see so many. See, you single out one thing, that makes it hard. But when you say the Olympics, that means, I get to go see all these things.
The last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, whom would you choose?
Oh. Wow. Probably Barack Obama.
He is by far number 1 choice. Bill Benner is the number 2 choice. Everybody wants.
Well, I've done that. And the 2 hours don't go by quickly, trust me.
Just listen to the Moody Blues the whole time?
Yes. Well, he's the Moody, but I converted him over to the Dave Matthews Band. So
you're responsible for that?
Yes. Very much so.
Well, Bill, if you're listening to this podcast, you're hearing the voice of two people who love you and think the absolute world of you. You've been a huge friend to me and mentor and an absolutely delightful lunch date all these years. You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been David Benner, formerly of the Indianapolis Star, but he has been Director of Media Relations for the Indiana Pacers for more than 25 years. Thank you so much, David. I enjoyed it. It was a blast. I really appreciate the time, and we're all rooting like crazy for you.
I appreciate that. Thanks for having me on. Don't forget my cookies.
I promise. Danielle Shockey, I'm calling you next. Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.